Well, welcome. It's so nice to be with you all during this holiday season. And I know I'm going to share a little bit about what I've seen recently around emotional sinkholes. And that didn't include being around you, Angus. It was completely on my own. How about you? How are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So people are just jumping on. We'll give them a little bit of time. I think we're good to go. So, oh, and let me just mute everyone for background noise. Okay, I think that's it. And you can always unmute yourselves if you would like to share. So I'll share for a little bit and then we'll have our breakouts and then we'll come back into the main group and have the opportunity to check in with each other. I think for myself, one of the things I was just not last week, but the week before, was it? Yeah, it was the week before that I went to my very first silent meditation retreat. I've done a lot of yoga meditation retreats, but never a silent meditation retreat. And I was really surprised at the energy in that retreat. Like it was surprising to me because of the things that I've done in the past included a lot of emotional processing work or conversation where energy would be moving. And this was mostly, like for myself anyway, in silence. There was the opportunity to share during one breakout in the week. And then there was the opportunity to participate in a Q&A if you were chosen for the Q&A. And there was some poetry reading done in the afternoon. So it wasn't like it was complete silence the whole time. But in terms of my sharing, there was very little talking going on my part. I did forget one point when there was where I was staying, it was this really steep hill up to the meditation center and the cafeteria where we'd eat. And so I'd walk up that hill during the day, but at night when it got really cold, because I was in North Carolina, I decided I'll take the shuttle in the night. And the shuttle driver said something to me, and I responded without even thinking. But I was pretty good. And I think that's pretty good for me.
Oh, you did. You didn't tell me that.
Oh, didn't I?
So
But
you broke
I
silence.
did break silence. I guess you got little pop-ups going on your computer.
Oh,
Okay. All right. I think it's good. So yeah, I think that was pretty good considering.
well done.
So one of the things, one of the things I notice about myself is that I can have a tendency to kind of go fast in terms of just following my intellect and not really stay present with everything that's going on with all parts of myself. So I thought for me, I'm going to do this for myself, but I invite you to join me to just take a moment and just connect with your body, connect with your sensations, notice how you're feeling, notice how your thoughts are, notice the sounds in the room, and just take that moment to really connect with your experience in this moment. And I'll share a little bit about my experience as I'm doing this. So, what I'm noticing is it's pretty quiet here. There's just a little background hum. It's nice and bright. Sun's out today. In terms of my body sensations, I notice I have a little tightness in my shoulders and a little tightness in my belly. And that's usually nerves. And so let me check my emotional experience. I'm excited. I'm happy to be with you all. And then I'm also a little nervous. And I think that um, sharing about this feels vulnerable. And that's probably what the nerves are about. And I'm just noticing my feet on the floor. My feet weren't in the equation yet. So, yeah, just notice the energy moving around your body. And just notice how you're in this safe space where it's okay to feel all of that. It's okay to feel this energy. It's okay to be with it. It's okay for it to be in your awareness. There's nothing to do with it, there's nothing to fix. Is this allowing yourself to be with what is in this moment? And so that's what I would say is a lot of what I learned when I was away on the retreat was the value of staying present to what was arising in the moment. And like I said earlier, what I found surprising was how much was arising in that moment. And the reason why I chose this topic, emotional sinkholes, because there were a couple times where that's what it really felt like. It felt like I fell down this emotional sinkhole. And I guess I'm really grateful because I haven't had those experiences recently in any kind of intense ways for a long, long time. And so I think that was partly what was so surprising for me is that I came up against emotional material that I wasn't expecting to come up against. And it was really powerful and healing and profound, and also a pointer to where I want to continue to deepen in my own, I don't know, what do I want to call it? My own deepening of connection with self or connection with that energy of the authentic self. And that in a spiritual conversation, especially in a non-dual spiritual conversation, that I don't even know if I'm qualified to have a non-dual spiritual conversation, but this idea that, you know, the authentic self is separate from, is not the personal self, and that emotional energy, emotional healing is somehow not part of that process of awakening. That just doesn't feel like that's my journey. Now, I don't know what anyone else's journey is. I can only speak to my journey. But for me, the ability to be with my own experience, including my own emotional experience, including really painful feelings, has been really the gateway to experiencing greater freedom and greater peace of mind, even though in the moment it can feel completely the opposite. So I'm going to share one experience. There's probably more than one that I can share, but I'll share one that's kind of funny, just as an example, an illustration. And it's this silly, and this is what's so funny about it. It's like this intense shame. I mean, there's a few times. I don't know. I might share lots of stories. We'll see how many come through. But one of the themes I would say of the week for me was coming up against shame and coming up against how embedded in my sense of self, my identity structure, this experience of shame feels like, and how it's something that even though I know is not true intellectually, gripped me in a way where it was so somatic, so painful. And obviously, the experience of it was real in the moment, so real that it really had me look at how do I navigate this in a way that is loving and kind and compassionate. And so one of the experiences was when in the afternoons there's this Q&A that you could raise your hand, and there's probably about nearly 300 people there. And if you were picked, you could go up and have a Q&A with the teacher whose name is Angelo DeLullo. And so I don't know, it's probably like the second day in, maybe the third day in, I decided, oh, I'd like to share. I have some questions. And so I raised my hand, and I was sitting a little bit far back, and there was how it worked was there was Angelo was on the stage, and then he had one of his one of his people helping him choosing the participants, and he had them sort of lined up two or three on the side waiting to go up. So it went really smoothly. And so when that person was choosing the people, he would kind of just pick you out of the audience. Now, where I was sitting, I couldn't really tell if he was pointing at me. So I'm like, I'm raising my hand. He's kind of pointing in my direction. And I'm like, is he pointing at me? Is he not pointing at me? We're not allowed to say anything at that point. So I'm like, well, I'll just go around the back and walk around and then kind of get closer so I can kind of get a sense of whether he was picking me or not. And so I do this, I make my journey around the back and I go up to him. And when we connect, eye contact, and I'm like, me? And he's like, it was felt really stern. I'm sure he was just trying to manage his sort of flow of things, but I took it so personally, and I was so ashamed. Like it was crazy the amount of shame that I felt. And like I said, it was so somatic. I literally felt how, when you see a dog who, like our dog sometimes as if he does something bad, like he'll kind of skulk back and his tail will be down. Well, I literally felt that way walking back and I couldn't even make it to my chair where I was sitting. I just walked all the way to the back of the room and I just sat down on the ground because you could sit in chairs or you can sit in the back of the room. And I just sat there and I just felt this energy moving through my body. And so that experience is such a great highlight of how what's going on outside has very little to do with what we're experiencing on the inside, because what happened on the outside on I would say a neutral, objective point of view was not really a big deal. I could have just walked back to my seat, sat down, no problem. What was happening internally was all kinds of thoughts of worthlessness, unlovability, shame, self disgust, like just all kinds of thoughts that were being identified with in such a strong way that my whole physiology was being impacted by them. So much so that I didn't even want to go and sit back in my seat. I just had to sit down. And so I was sitting there in this experience, kind of witnessing it, noticing it. And I don't even remember if I was able to pay attention to the Q&A at that point. I might not have been. But what was sort of embedded throughout the whole experience of the week was just be with your experience. Be with it arising as it arises. Can you open to it? Can you meet it? And so that was the invitation in that moment. And I know that it's not like Angus and I haven't said this before, but when you're in it, when you're really gripped by it, just want to acknowledge it's not always easy to do. And it's really easy to look for the escape routes. And sometimes, sitting in a meditation hall in silence, there's not a lot of escape routes available. But in life, there's plenty that are available. And I want to acknowledge that there's nothing wrong with taking an escape route. It's really important to listen to your own wisdom, to listen to your own inner guidance as to what is the kindest thing to do for yourself in those moments. Because your relationship with yourself, when you're caught up emotionally, to me is one of the most important things. Can you be kind and gentle with yourself as you're going through it? And if you can't, that's the learning curve. There's nothing wrong or bad. It's just like, oh, there's an opportunity to notice how it's possible to relate to yourself in ways that are gentle, kind, compassionate, and understanding. Now, in that moment, I think there was kind of some shock happening inside of me, like, what's going on that I'm feeling this so intensely? So some surprise. So I don't know if that would count as compassion, but it was definitely authentic and real. And then there was the willingness. I had the willingness in that moment to just sit with it and allow it and to be with it and to let the energy move through. And that when we're able to not take a sort of one of those detours and try and avoid our experience for a time, when we're willing to just be with our experience and let that energy move through, there's such a powerful realization in the capacity for the nervous system, the capacity for our psychology, the capacity for our body to just be with it. And I think for me, that was really powerful to recognize as much as I was resisting because it was uncomfortable. Like it wouldn't have been uncomfortable if I wasn't resisting. I wasn't in control of that resistance. I wasn't choosing to resist, but there was resistance happening. But I could just be with the layers of feeling. I could be with the layers of resistance. I could be with all of that and let that energy move through. And really, ultimately, what I could see or experience was it's just energy. It's just contraction. I could feel the contraction in my body. Like when we checked in at the beginning and I felt that tightness in my belly, like that That's a contraction, right? That's just a slight contraction. When I was sitting there in that room, there was a lot more contraction happening, but that's all it is. And to have that capacity to feel safe within yourself, the way that that gets built is by having that experience of seeing your capacity to be with that. And then for me, what shifted was that contraction was able to soften and open, and emotion was released, energy was released in that form. And then there was less contraction. And so I think one of the most beautiful things about being with ourselves in a way that allows for that self compassion, allows for that open heartedness with ourselves, is how it just simply allows the intelligence of our system to do what it needs to do in terms of that emotional reorganization. And I think this happened beforehand. I think this was probably the day before I had one of my breakouts. And the same kind of thing was happening in the breakouts. There was probably about 20 people or so, maybe a little less, in the group with two leaders. And the opportunity was to share. You didn't have to share. There was no rules about you have to share. But inside of me, I felt like this incredible tightness and this incredible pressure as if I was supposed to share something. And I think part of me was like I wanted to get the most out of it. And so I felt like if I didn't share, that would be not really acknowledging the fear that was going on inside of me around sharing in this group. And so I decided I was going to share what my experience was in terms of that tightness inside of myself. And so when I mentioned this to the facilitator, she just asked me to touch in with it and feel it, exactly what I was saying earlier. But in this experience, when she asked me some other questions about if there were any memories that came up alongside it. And when she asked that question, it was such a vivid memory came forward of me being probably around, I don't know, probably three, because I think I started school when I was young at three. And I had wet my pants at school, and the other kids knew and were making fun of me. And I just felt such intense shame and embarrassment in that moment. But I was experiencing those emotions in that group at whatever, 57 years of age, sitting in that circle. And what was so beautiful about that moment was being able to just have the transparency to share what was going on inside of me and having that space of acceptance, of kindness with others, and to be witnessed and to just allow that emotional energy to move through me. So I wasn't talking. I mean, I did mention that experience, but I was feeling all of that feeling. And I think maybe some people in the group were a little concerned about how much distress I was in, but really that was just the energy moving through me and moving through me in a way where I could feel safety in a way that I had not been able to feel it before with others, that allowed that recognition of what's true in this moment to break through the conditioning, to break through all of the layers of coping mechanisms that I've developed in order to look okay, to not show you how afraid I am, to cover up my feelings of unworthiness, like to just be able to, Shauna, we did a webinar with our daughter. I think it was the last one we did, and she was talking about unmasking. But so to be able to take that mask off and just have the rawness of my experience be able to be not only felt by myself, but also witnessed was liberating, right? That was freeing. And so with Angus's and my work in terms of rewilding, I mean, this is what we're pointing to is how through opening to all of our emotional experience, the full range of it, whatever is showing up for us in the moment, how we can create the safety within us to be able to meet experience in the present moment. And in a space like this where we gather together, there's the opportunity to co-create that safe space with each other so that we can all have the capacity to take the mask off and to let that conditioning go and to free ourselves from the pain of that conditioning that is serving a purpose, right? And what I touched into on this retreat was really, really young feelings that were were me doing the best that I could at 3 years old to try and not feel destroyed by the shame that I was feeling in that moment. And then I think my nanny picked me up and found out, and then she hit me when she found I peed my pants. So it was like this layering of it, right? This layering of shame and the internalization of that, and how the beauty of our survival mechanism figures out, what do I need to do to not feel this pain in this moment? How do I survive in a world where people are going to be so cruel and mean and hurtful and not understanding? Not all the time, but at least some of the time, when I have this level of sensitivity, right? This level of sensitivity. And we all have that. We all have that. I'm not just talking about myself here. But as we embark on this awakening, whether we're choosing to embark on it or it chooses us in a sense, we all have this impulse within us to awaken to who we truly are, to awaken to the energy of our true nature, the unconditional love, peace, well-being, however you want to describe it, however you know that space within yourself, that experience within yourself. We are called to awaken to that. And in that call, right, the call of the wild, in that call, we're going to meet these misunderstandings, right? My misunderstanding that I can't be myself in front of others. It's not safe to be me, right? That's a misunderstanding. And then there's all of the behaviors that I adapt to based on that misunderstanding. And that's part of when I'm talking about a misunderstanding, that's part of the identity structure of the conditioned self. It's not truth. It might have been true in that moment. And it doesn't mean that I have to bare my soul to everybody all of the time, but I can sometimes. And I can be willing to do that here with you now to the best of my abilities. And I can be willing to say that I want to create, and we want to create, and we want to create a space where it's safe for all of us to do that with all of the feelings that are going to come forward. And that in that experience, the purpose of that is to meet what's really true, to meet what's beyond the misunderstandings that have been created along the way. Misunderstandings that we're aware of consciously, misunderstandings that we're not even aware of consciously. But this is where the feedback of the body is so helpful. The feedback of the emotions is so helpful. Because when we pay attention, we notice how we're doing. When I pay attention and I notice that I've got a little bit of tightness in my tummy, it's like I know that, oh, there's some fear there. That's okay. But I don't need to hide it here, at least. I don't need to be ashamed of it because it's there. I can just allow it to be there and create space for it and welcome that part of me, just like all the other parts, just like all the other sensations that are moving through me, including the feeling of my heart being open, including the feeling of my feet being grounded on the ground, the feeling of relaxation, of being able to have that exhale. There's room for all of that. And there's often this push-pull, like when I was in that group, there's an incredible terror about sharing and this incredible desire to share. Just like when I was in that hall, it's like, oh, I want to share. And then all of a sudden, there's this incredible shame for making that mistake. But to be able to make room for the push-pull within us, the dichotomies that show up, to allow room for those polarities and to embrace all of it in whatever way makes sense for you, and to know that part of the self-care is also to allow ourselves to find ways to numb out, to know that there's nothing wrong with whatever the choice is that makes sense for us in the moment. Even if some of those numbing out behaviors are not the kindest towards ourselves or can have consequences or repercussions to them, sometimes that's the best that we can do. And that doesn't mean we can't get help with that or that we can't choose to stop those behaviors. But it's so important to recognize the pain that's behind them. And it really isn't until we can feel what's behind those behaviors that those behaviors are going to want to have some space and room to shift. And so that's my invitation to all of us today as we go into this holiday season, as we might be spending more time with loved ones, more time with friends. There may be more social time than we normally have. There may not be. There may be more alone time. There may be loneliness that comes up. I mean, there's all kinds of feelings that come up around the holiday season, and negative feelings can definitely be amplified at this time of year. And so my invitation is for each one of us to be looking in the direction of self-compassion, be looking in the direction of slowing down in a way that allows you to really welcome your experience fully when you're ready to welcome it, and to create the space and the time in your life where that can be done in a compassionate way, where you can really allow yourself to have the experience of feeling safe being present. And that can sound kind of trite, but for me, that was such a huge impact to be able to realize, not just think, but realize that I am safe in this present moment. I am safe in this present moment, no matter what the experience is arising within me, no matter what. And that, for me, is liberation. It's not being attached to a certain experience. It's not seeking a certain experience. It's realizing that whatever the experience is that's arising within me in the moment, whether I like it, whether I don't like it, whether I resist it, whether I'm open to it, doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because there's the capacity to open to it and experience safety in this moment. And that experience helps to erase the misunderstandings of all the other experiences where we really didn't feel safe in that moment. It's through the truth of this moment that those misunderstandings start to reveal themselves as not true. It doesn't mean they weren't true at the time, but what happens is, like for me, I'm sitting in a group of 18 people that are a part of a meditation retreat, and I'm feeling unsafe. That was the conditioning. That was the misunderstanding alive and at play. I'm skulking to the back of the meditation hall because of the conditioning that was alive and at play and identified with in those moments. It doesn't mean anything. It's okay. That's part of the healing. That's part of waking up. bringing that into consciousness. Like I said, I haven't been experiencing a lot of uncomfortable emotions for a really long time, but I'm glad that I was able to meet these parts of myself, meet these experiences, meet these thoughts, however you want to describe it. I'm glad that there was a deepening in my intention and a deepening in my willingness that allowed this to come up. And I'm not saying that this needs to, we need to be living in emotional tumult all the time. But when it's there, the opportunity is to welcome it. The opportunity is to see it for what it is, an opportunity to bring the unconscious into conscious so that we can be with it in such a way that we feel our own compassion and that we wake up to the truth of what is in this moment. And we don't live in the past of what we decided in that moment. And so that's the invitation for all of you today. And I'll check in with Angus and see if there's anything you want to add.
I mean, there'd be so much that I could add.
Well, you
I
don't
don't
have to.
even know where to begin. But I think, yes, I think what you're pointing to is beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts. I
Do you
think,
want to share them after the break, or
sure.
I didn't mean to put you on the
No,
spot.
no, not at all. I mean, I think that, yeah, I feel like shame is certainly in my experience is something that I have carried for years. And I think one of the things that I witness at the treatment center is that there is so much value to be in a group where you get to explore those experiences, the conditioning that you may have carried for decades that you haven't been able to talk about because of said shame. And then finally, you're able to feel like this is a safe enough container for me to liberate myself from that shame. And you talk about it, and then it's met with love and compassion, and that is so healing.
Mhm.
So I think that's a really interesting theme to explore. I feel like, yeah, and there are so many directions that you can go in with it. And the other thing that occurred to me to say that is that with this sort of exploration of non-dualism, ultimately, if we were able to sort of really see that we are all one on a spiritual level, and the only thing that really is getting in the way is our shame and our conditioning, then we would probably be able to live on this planet in absolute balance and harmony in the way that hopefully, that is how it's meant. I don't know, but yeah, for me, that the shame is something that's very pertinent in terms of what one might talk about.
Well, I feel like you've talked about it a lot, and you've been really diligent in your own healing around that. So you've been really inspiring for me with relationship to that. And then, just talking about this, like there's something I want to say about non-dualism experience that it's just a flavor. I can't really tie it down, but one of the things that I realized as part of my own conditioning was that I constructed an inside that's safe and an outside that's not safe. And so my coping mechanisms were to go inside, to be alone, to read books, to daydream. Like I had all of this inner world that was really cozy and comfortable for me as a way to navigate life. And what I saw, I can't even say more clearly, but what I sensed more is that there really is no inside and outside. Like that is all made up. And that was helpful for me to make it up because it gave me a imaginary space of being safe. But ultimately, it's energy that has no boundary. And so there is no inside and outside. So if I feel safe in this imaginary Rohini land, it's like it's all that. It's not anything but that. And so that's something that is percolating inside of me and feels liberating to recognize how made up that was and to realize that, like, I don't need to live with that limitation in the same way that I have. And I think one of the most profound takeaways I had from that time is that, oh, here's the time to really meet this feeling this these conditioned experiences within myself in an intentional way. Like that feels really clear to me. And, as part of doing this, I think we've been intentional in that way for a long time, but it feels like there's an even deeper willingness on my part to take the mask off, to share in ways that are supportive, not just of myself, but also of those listening, of you, and giving yourselves for all of us to help each other, right? That we can be in this journey and help each other through our kindness, through our compassion, through our supportiveness, through our capacity to listen, to understand, and to see. At the university I used to work at, they would talk about seeing the loving essence, like our willingness to see the loving essence of each person and recognize that that is who we all are, every single one of us. And so that feels like the perfect segue to the breakouts.